The encounter that changed everything. Have you ever wondered what it's like to discover you're completely wrong about someone with just one touch? Declan Passons discovered this in the worst possible way, or the best, depending on how you view these matters of destiny. In the most coveted penthouse in Louisville, on the 42nd floor of the waterfront tower, with a panoramic 360-degree view of the Ohio River and downtown skyline, he watched Peyton Lawson move through the room as if she were made of Venetian crystal. The environment exuded European luxury, Carrara marble floors imported directly from Tuscany, furniture designed by Swiss architects, contemporary art pieces that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. This was supposed to be just another business night. Another contract fulfilled, another carefully orchestrated performance for his public image before the conservative investors from Zurich arriving next week. But when she turned to face him, moving with a natural grace that couldn't be bought or taught, with those hazel eyes that seemed to hold all the secrets and sorrows of the world, Declan felt something he hadn't experienced in years, true and paralyzing fear. Not fear of her specifically, but visceral fear of himself, fear of the intensity with which her presence affected him, fear of how she could completely disarm his emotional defenses with a simple, direct and honest look. The room was strategically illuminated by the golden, soft lights of Czechoslovakian crystal chandeliers that his international decorator had meticulously chosen after 3 months of research in European antique shops, creating an atmosphere too intimate, too warm, too human for an encounter that should be strictly professional and protocol-driven. The navy blue Italian silk dress he had sent through his personal assistant fit her perfectly. He had studied her measurements through discreetly obtained photos, but it was the way she moved within that dress that completely disarmed him. There wasn't the calculated and artificial ease of the women in his social circle, that rehearsed performance of seduction he knew so well. Instead, there was a disconcerting naturalness, an authenticity that made him question everything he had planned for that night. "So," she said, nervously adjusting the cultured pearl necklace that completed the look, her long, delicate fingers trembling slightly under the golden light. "How exactly does this all work? Is there an instruction manual for being a millionaire's fake girlfriend?" "Because I can design sustainable residential complexes, calculate the structural resistance of 20-story buildings, and create architectural solutions for complex urban problems. But this is completely outside my area of expertise and leaves me absolutely lost." The question came out with a touch of self-defensive irony that caught him completely off guard. He had carefully studied her psychological profile through the detailed report his private investigator had prepared. He expected submission, perhaps a bit of dazzlement typical of someone who had never stepped into such an environment. He didn't expect sharp intelligence wrapped in genuine vulnerability, like a gift you receive without expecting that completely changes your perspective on gifts. "Peyton," he began, approaching slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might either flee or attack, his Italian leather shoes making minimal noise on the polished marble. "You don't need to pretend with me when we're alone. The theater is only for the world outside, for the cameras, for social events. Here, within these 4 walls, we can be ourselves." "Pretend what exactly?" she asked, tilting her head slightly in a gesture he would soon learn was characteristic of her when processing complex information or trying to decipher the motivations behind people's words. "That this doesn't scare you as much as it scares me." She laughed, but it was a melancholic and reflective laugh, one of those you give when life pushes you to places you never imagined stepping into, when you find yourself doing things you swore you'd never do. The sound echoed through the spacious room, harmoniously mixing with the distant noise of Louisville traffic below and the gentle, constant lapping of waves against the exclusive marina piers. "You know what's most ironically funny about this whole situation, Declan?" She gestured nervously with her hands, a habit he immediately noticed. I was at home this morning, in my small but cozy two-bedroom apartment in Old Louisville, lovingly watering my ferns and African violets, plants I've been cultivating for years as a form of therapy and connection with something living and true. When your assistant called, an extremely polite and professional woman, I must say, with that perfect diction of someone who studied at expensive schools. She paused, as if organizing her thoughts before continuing. I initially thought it was about the sustainable urbanization project I presented at the seminar at the Brown Hotel yesterday. You know, that constructive but pointed criticism I made about the devastating social impacts of tourism, megadevelopments on traditional communities? Imagine my surprise to gradually discover that the project was, well, myself. I am literally the project to be executed. He stopped just a few centimeters from her, close enough to notice details that the investigator's report hadn't captured. That she had chosen a different perfume from what she wore at the lecture. Natural jasmine with subtle sandalwood notes, soft and enveloping, so different from the expensive and cloying French perfumes of the women in his social circle. It was a perfume you wanted to smell again, that created memories instead of just superficially impressing. Close enough to notice that her nails were carefully trimmed but without polish, hands that worked, that created, that built real things in the world. Close enough to see small expression lines around her eyes, signs of someone who smiled genuinely frequently, even amid difficulties. And why did you accept? His voice came out more hoarse and emotionally charged than he intended, as if the question had been torn from somewhere deep inside him. Her eyes filled with crystalline tears that she terminantly refused to let fall, blinking rapidly as if she could push them away through pure willpower. It was a silent battle between pride and vulnerability that he immediately recognized, because he fought the same battle every day. Because my sister Emma, my younger sister, who is the most important person in my life, has been hospitalized for 2 months at University of Louisville Hospital with a rare and aggressive autoimmune disease that doctors are still trying to precisely diagnose. The words came out rushed, as if she needed to say them quickly before losing courage. The public health system is failing. Experimental medications cost fortunes we don't have, and each day that passes without adequate treatment means more irreversible damage to her organism. She took a deep breath, trying to maintain composure. Because my mother, Margaret Lawson, who dedicated 40 years of her entire life to elementary public education, forming generations of children from the inner city, can no longer pay even her basic bills after her retirement was drastically cut by the new government's pension reform. Because the architecture firm where I worked for 5 years went bankrupt overnight when the senior partner fled with clients' money abroad, leaving me legally responsible for a debt of $120,000 that I didn't incur but is registered in my name. She trembled visibly. I simply have nothing left to lose in this life except my dignity. And apparently even that has a clearly established market price. It was at that exact moment, while watching a solitary and stubborn tear escape and slowly roll down her rosy cheek, that Declan Passons, the man who had meticulously built a financial empire, buying and selling people, places, dreams and hopes, realized with absolute clarity that he had found something that couldn't be bought, sold, negotiated or falsified, true purity in completely raw state. He automatically extended his hand to touch her face, but stopped midway, his fingers suspended in air as if there were an invisible energy barrier between them, as if touching her might break some fragile enchantment. What if I told you that you don't need to do absolutely anything besides being exactly yourself? That there are no physical, sexual or romantic expectations in this commercial agreement? I would say that you simply know absolutely nothing about how the world really works for people like me, Mr. Passons. She responded with brutal honesty that cut him like a blade. People who were born on the geographically wrong side of this city's economic stratification. People for whom contracts with rich men always, inevitably include unwritten but clearly implicit clauses. Maybe you're right about many things, he murmured, finally touching her face with a delicacy he didn't know he possessed, as if she were made of precious, ancient Chinese porcelain. But I would sincerely like to learn a different perspective of the world, if you're willing to teach me. And there, in that room strategically illuminated by the golden and pulsating lights of the city that majestically extended as far as the eye could reach, surrounded by imported European luxury and authentic American solitude, something fundamental and irreversible changed in the gravitational axis of their lives. The detailed 6-page contract was still impeccably organized on the tempered glass coffee table, but suddenly seemed infinitely less important than the human and real warmth of her skin under his fingers. "Declan," she whispered, her voice hoarse with contained emotion, "are you absolutely certain you know exactly what you're getting into with me? Because I'm not like the women in your world. I don't know the rules of these sophisticated games. I don't know how to fake feelings I don't have or hide feelings I do have." He smiled, a genuine and completely disarmed smile for the first time in years, so different from the calculated and strategic smile he used religiously in business meetings and social events. "Absolutely certain that I have no idea what I'm doing," he admitted, with surprising vulnerability. "And for the first time in my adult life, this uncertainty doesn't terrify or paralyze me. On the contrary, it excites me in a way I can't explain rationally. But at that exact moment of mutual vulnerability and authentic connection across the city, in the luxurious penthouse of the Highlands condominium with a view of the riverfront, Victoria Ashford had just seen a photo of the two of them on the penthouse balcony, taken by a professional paparazzi with a high-definition telephoto lens specifically contracted to monitor Declan's movements. And Victoria, a former socialite accustomed since childhood to having everything she wanted when she wanted it, was never one to accept defeat without declaring total and devastating war. The game had just officially begun, and the rules were about to change completely, in ways far more cruel and destructive than either of them could imagine in their worst nightmares. Discovering true love. 3 weeks after the encounter that changed their lives, Peyton discovered that living with Declan Parsons was like trying to solve an extremely complex 3-dimensional puzzle where the pieces constantly changed shape, color, and texture with each passing day, revealing layers of personality she had never imagined possible in a single human being. In the morning, punctually at 6 o'clock, he was the relentless and focused executive wearing custom-made suits from renowned Italian designers who closed multi-million-dollar deals with Japanese businessmen and German investors before even having the gourmet breakfast meticulously prepared by the discreet and efficient housekeeper who came 3 times a week. He spoke 4 languages fluently during video conferences, analyzed complex financial spreadsheets with computer-like precision, and made decisions affecting hundreds of jobs with the naturalness of someone choosing the color of a tie. In the afternoon, surprisingly, he transformed into the attentive and caring man who left handwritten notes with his elegant handwriting strategically stuck to the imported Sub-Zero refrigerator, asking if she preferred white or yellow orchids to brighten the living room, or if she would like him to bring something specific from the organic market he had recently discovered that sold products from small local producers. At night he metamorphosed into someone completely different and unexpected, vulnerable, genuinely present, almost shy, as if he took off a mask he wore all day and could finally just be human. It was on one of those warm Thursday nights, typical of the Kentucky summer that was coming to an end, with the salty and fragrant breeze from the Ohio River entering generously through the panoramic windows, and Louisville illuminated like a necklace of diamonds and yellow topazes below, that they were dining quietly on the gourmet balcony when he made the apparently simple observation that would completely change their relationship dynamic. "You don't eat meat at all?" he asked, frowning expressively while watching her meticulously separate all the pieces of artisanal smoked bacon from the Caesar salad that the private chef had prepared, especially to impress her with sophisticated culinary techniques. "Not since I was 15, she responded with absolute naturalness, focused on the hand-painted French porcelain plate. Emma and I watched an investigative documentary together about industrial livestock farming and inhumane conditions in modern slaughterhouses. It was cinematographically traumatic and emotionally devastating. I still sleep poorly when I think about those images of unnecessary animal suffering and systematized cruelty. And here I was, naively planning to take you tomorrow night to Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse, considered the best and most renowned imported noble meat restaurant in Louisville," he said, genuinely embarrassed and concerned about his own ignorance. "The Swiss investors love a good Argentine ribeye, accompanied by expensive Chilean wines." She looked up with her hazel eyes, genuinely amused and touched by the expression of sincere despair that formed on his face, as if he had committed a grave crime against humanity. "Are you trying to impress me, Mr. Parsons?" she asked, with a mischievous smile that illuminated her entire face. "Because if that's the case, there are much more efficient and creative ways to win over a convinced vegetarian passionate about environmental sustainability. Is it working? The attempt to impress, I mean? It depends entirely on your gastronomic flexibility and your willingness to experiment with completely new culinary horizons." She smiled mischievously, playing distractedly with the silver fork. "Do you eat vegetables voluntarily? Greens without making faces? Something nutritious that hasn't run, swum, or flown in a previous life? Define vegetables in practical and objective terms for a man who was raised on steaks, grilled shrimp, and sophisticated dishes in five-star restaurants. Anything colorful and nutritious that grows from the earth and isn't French fries, garlic-grilled shrimp, or 12-year-old Scotch whiskey." He laughed spontaneously, a deep and warm sound that echoed melodiously through the spacious balcony, and Peyton noticed how incredibly pleasant his laugh was to hear when it was genuine and relaxed. Nothing like that controlled, measured, and strategic laugh he used as a persuasion tool in business meetings or social events where he needed to impress potential investors. "Touché, architect," he said, elegantly raising his glass of Portuguese wine. "But I can learn quickly. I'm surprisingly adaptable when the motivation is adequate and inspiring." "Why?" The question escaped more serious and emotionally charged than she originally intended, as if it had come from somewhere very deep inside her. Declan completely stopped cutting the grilled salmon on his plate and looked directly at her, those intense dark eyes suddenly penetrating and charged with a vulnerability she had never seen before. "Because," he hesitated carefully, as if searching for exact words in an emotional dictionary he had kept closed and locked for many years. "Because when you truly smile, not that polite and protocol smile of courtesy you automatically use in public, it's as if this entire cold and impersonal penthouse becomes more alive, more human, as if it gains its own soul and true purpose." Peyton felt her heart dangerously accelerate and an intense wave of heat rise up her neck, spreading across her cheeks. This definitely wasn't contemplated in the detailed 26-clause contract they had studied and meticulously signed. "Declan, we really need to seriously talk about the clear and well-defined limits of all this," she said, setting down the fork with more force than necessary, the metallic sound echoing through the silent balcony. "What limit specifically are you referring to? The absolutely clear limits between what is real and authentic and what is calculated and performative staging." She took a deep breath, trying to organize thoughts that seemed to be in constant movement and evolution. "Because I no longer know what the practical difference is between professional performance and genuine feeling, and that scares me deeply." He elegantly rose from the cushioned chair and walked around the Brazilian teak table with deliberate movements, stopping strategically beside her, close enough for her to feel the body heat emanating from him and the discreet masculine cologne he wore. What if I honestly admitted that I also no longer know the difference? That this confuses and disorients me as much as it confuses you? Before she could formulate a coherent response, or at least articulate the contradictory feelings she was experiencing, his latest model iPhone vibrated insistently on the table, displaying the name Marcus Sullivan on the illuminated screen. "Declan, we have an extremely serious and urgent problem." The voice of Marcus Sullivan, his personal lawyer and best friend since their days at University of Louisville Law School, came out tense and visibly worried from the speaker. Victoria Ashford gave an exclusive and devastating interview to 60 Minutes. The piece airs tonight in exactly 2 hours. And from what I've been able to gather through my contacts at the network, it's not favorable for you two at all. Declan's blood literally froze in his veins, as if someone had injected liquid ice directly into his bloodstream, completely paralyzing him. "About what specific subject?" he asked with controlled voice, although he already knew intuitively that he wouldn't like even a millimeter of the answer that was coming. "About Peyton, obviously," Marcus responded with a grave tone. "She's publicly insinuating in a very well-articulated manner that you two have a financial agreement of a, let's say, dubious and morally questionable nature. She hasn't explicitly said it's prostitution disguised as dating yet, but the subtext is being very intelligently constructed to irreversibly destroy both your reputations." Peyton visibly paled, as if all blood had been instantly drained from her face in a second, leaving her with a spectral appearance. "What does this mean in practice for us?" she asked with a tremulous and almost inaudible voice, already knowing intuitively that she wouldn't like even a millimeter of the answer that was coming. "It means," Declan spoke slowly, running his hands through his dark hair with evident frustration and contained anger, "that our social honeymoon abruptly ended before it even officially began. And that war has been formally declared against us." 2 hours later, they were in Marcus' panoramic office on the 30th floor of a commercial building in downtown Louisville, watching the absolutely devastating preview of the interview on his latest generation tablet, while the city nervously buzzed with malicious comments on social media and hashtags related to their names were already beginning to appear in national trending topics. Declan has always been, let's say, extremely practical and strategic in his romantic relationships, Victoria was telling the reporter with that venomous and calculated smile that Peyton was already learning to viscerally hate. "So when I saw him suddenly in love with an architect completely unknown in the sophisticated social circles we habitually frequent, well, let's say there's much more to this romantic story than it publicly appears. Much more indeed. She can't prove absolutely anything she's insinuating," said Marcus, but his experienced voice didn't sound convincing or confident at all, carrying evident concern. "She doesn't need to prove anything," Peyton murmured somberly, feeling the world systematically collapse around her like a house of cards. "The malicious insinuation is more than enough to destroy me professionally and socially irreversibly. In today's society, suspicion is worth as much as certainty when it comes to a woman's reputation." Declan knelt on the cold marble floor in front of the leather armchair where she sat, holding Peyton's cold and trembling hands between his with infinite delicacy. "Peyton looked directly into my eyes and listened to me with total attention," he said with absolute determination. "We're going to solve this together, step by step. I solemnly promise I won't let her destroy you or your family." "How exactly?" Her eyes filled with tears of frustration and helpless anger. "How do you practically solve the incontestable fact that she's technically right about many things, that I really accepted substantial money to be with you publicly? How exactly do you fight against truth when it's used as a weapon? Because..." He held her face between his hands with infinite delicacy, as if she were the most precious object in the universe. Because this may have formally started as a cold and calculated commercial contract, but it's no longer about money or strategic business. Not for me. It will never be just that again. And for me, she whispered with a completely broken voice. How are you absolutely certain it's not about money and financial security for me too? How do you differentiate deep gratitude from true love? How can I myself differentiate? The question hung suspended in the office's air conditioning like an emotional bomb about to explode and completely destroy everything they had built together. Because, to be brutally honest with herself, not even Peyton herself knew the answer to that fundamental question that would define both their futures. The storm intensifies. University of Louisville Hospital had never seemed so oppressive and sinister as on that foggy and humid Thursday morning. Peyton walked through the polished linoleum corridors, desperately trying not to think about the absolutely devastating interview that had aired the night before. But it was humanly impossible to ignore the furtive and judgmental looks from nurses, the malicious whispers that followed her like invisible ghosts, and the disguised comments that seemed to echo through the white and cold walls of the hospital like a cruel symphony of social judgment. Her photo was plastered on all internet gossip portals, on Twitter and Instagram trending topics, on covers of popular newspapers that accumulated threateningly at the city's magazine stands. Louisville's Cinderella was what they were calling her story with a tone of mockery, but the tone definitely wasn't romantic or positive at all. The headlines were increasingly sensationalist. Poor architect becomes millionaire's girlfriend. The price of love in Louisville. Is it true love or financial interest? Social media was filled with cruel memes, malicious comments, and unfounded speculation about her intimate life. Peyton! Emma received her with a tight and comforting hug as soon as she entered room 304, which had become a second home in recent weeks. I saw absolutely everything on CNN Online and Instagram. You literally became a celebrity overnight. There are even memes on Instagram with your face, and some are actually funny, despite all the drama. Famous definitely is the word it used to describe this terrible situation, Peyton murmured somberly, carefully arranging the vase of orange gerbras she'd bought from the hospital's florist, trying to bring some color and life to the sterile hospital environment. So, tell me absolutely everything in minute detail, Emma insisted with genuine curiosity, pulling her sister to sit in the companion chair that had become her permanent spot. And don't come to me with that official and protocol story that it's just a commercial contract, because your eyes have been shining in a completely different way since you met this mysterious man. It's obvious there's much more involved than you're admitting. Before Peyton could formulate an honest or at least convincing answer to her sister's perceptive question, Dr. Richard Morrison entered the room without the basic courtesy of knocking, his presence immediately filling the environment with an unpleasant and predatory energy that made both sisters feel instantly uncomfortable. Dr. Morrison was a middle-aged man with graying hair combed back, an expensive but questionably tasteful suit, and a smile that never reached his small, calculating eyes. There was something in his posture and mannerisms that always made Peyton feel as if she were being evaluated as merchandise. "Miss Lawson, I need to speak urgently with you," he said, in an authoritative tone, emphasizing each word. "Privately. It's a delicate matter requiring absolute discretion." Emma instinctively frowned, her artistic instinct and natural sensitivity immediately capturing the negative and threatening vibes from the doctor, but Peyton made a discreet hand signal for her sister to stay calm and not create unnecessary problems that could further compromise her medical treatment. In the semi-illuminated hospital corridor, between the penetrating smell of hospital disinfectant and the constant and irritating noise of medical equipment, cardiac monitors and whispered conversations, Dr. Morrison went straight to the point with the calculated brutality of an experienced butcher. "I saw the revealing interview with Mrs. Ashford last night on the CBS program," he said, his small, dark eyes shining with poorly disguised malice, like a predator who had found vulnerable prey. "Very interesting, and Extremely revealing. Your current and apparently lucrative situation with Mr. Passons. An impressive financial transformation for a family in difficulties. Doctor, if you have something pertinent and professional to say about my sister's specific medical treatment— Oh, I do. Much to say about that. He interrupted her brusquely with a smile that looked more like a predatory grimace. You see, Miss Lawson, the experimental treatment your sister urgently needs to have any real chance of complete cure costs approximately $250,000. A substantial amount that, until last week, you definitely didn't have, nor any remote prospect of obtaining. But now, with your new and, let's say, lucrative relationship, I imagine financial matters have become considerably easier and more manageable for the Lawson family. Peyton felt a cold shiver run up her spine and spread throughout her body like liquid ice, a sensation of imminent danger that activated all her survival instincts simultaneously. "Where exactly are you going with this invasive and inappropriate conversation?" she asked with controlled voice, although part of her already knew intuitively that she wouldn't like even a bit of the answer that was coming. "I want to get to the incontestable fact that I have some extremely interested and influential investors in the hospital's technological improvements and expansions." He approached one step, deliberately invading her personal space. "Powerful and well-connected men who, how to say diplomatically, appreciate educated, sophisticated and attractive female company at exclusive social events and important business meetings. If you could be, let's say, receptive and collaborative with these social arrangements. I'm absolutely certain that Emma's experimental treatment would be approved and initiated immediately without all this tedious and frustrating bureaucracy of medical insurance." The world literally spun around Peyton as if she were on an out-of-control carousel at high speed. She had to firmly hold on to the cold iron handrail of the corridor to not collapse right there on the cold and impersonal hospital floor. "What exactly are you proposing to me?" she asked with difficulty, although the words came out with great difficulty from her dry throat, as if it were sand being forced through a funnel. "I'm offering a mutually beneficial and financially advantageous business opportunity," he responded with disconcerting cynicism and disturbing naturalness. "You've already publicly demonstrated being flexible in your personal and financial arrangements. It would just be a natural and logical extension of what you already do professionally with Mr. Passons. Some elegant dinners, some exclusive parties, sophisticated social events, nothing that a woman of your recent experience couldn't handle with elegance and discretion." Declan's deep and furious voice cut through the corridor air like a sharp steel blade. "Dr. Morrison, I believe there's been a profoundly grave and unacceptable misunderstanding here." Peyton turned surprised and genuinely relieved. She hadn't seen him coming through the hospital corridors, his steps silent on the linoleum. "Mr. Passons," the doctor visibly paled, as if he had seen a particularly threatening ghost. "I didn't know you were— that I was here listening to every sordid word of this conversation." "Well, now you know perfectly." Declan approached with measured and controlled steps, radiating a cold and dangerous authority that made the doctor instinctively retreat against the wall. "And you also know that this entire absolutely sordid and criminal conversation was recorded in high definition with perfect audio quality." He showed his latest model smartphone, which had been discreetly recording the conversation since the moment he had arrived at the corridor. "Now, Dr. Morrison, I'm going to explain some things so they're absolutely clear," Declan continued, with dangerously low voice. "First, you just committed the crimes of sexual harassment, blackmail and coercion. Second, I have enough connections to ensure you never practice medicine again in any hospital in America. Third, if you even look in the direction of my wife or her family again, you'll discover that my patience has very well-defined limits." "Wife?" Dr. Morrison stammered, clearly confused. "Peyton!" Declan extended his protective arm to her without taking his threatening eyes off the doctor. "Let's leave this place immediately." In the silent elevator, while they slowly descended to the ground floor, She finally collapsed emotionally, all the accumulated tensions of recent weeks exploding at once. "How did you know exactly where I was?" she asked between contained sobs. "Marcus told me about Dr. Morrison's alternative practices and questionable ethics with families in vulnerable financial situations," Declan explained. "We did a complete investigation and discovered he's not exactly an example of medical ethics or adequate professional conduct. There are at least 3 ongoing processes against him with the Kentucky Medical Board." "And now?" she asked, her voice tremulous with anger and genuine fear. "He can deliberately harm Emma's treatment to revenge the humiliation he suffered. He has that power. He can't and won't." Declan looked at her with absolute determination. "Because starting tomorrow morning, Emma will be transferred to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. The best specialists in the country for autoimmune diseases will personally take care of her case, with access to the most advanced treatments available in the world." "Declan, I can't pay for treatment at that level of sophistication." "It's already completely paid for, organized and scheduled," he said naturally, as if talking about the weather or buying coffee. Peyton literally stopped breathing for several seconds, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. "Declan, this definitely wasn't contemplated in our original agreement. The contract didn't include—" "Forget the commercial agreement." He held her trembling hands between his with firmness. "Emma is your sister, the most important person in your life. That automatically makes her important to me too. That's how it works when you genuinely care about someone. You protect the people that person loves." "Why?" she whispered, tears of confusion and gratitude flowing freely down her face. "Why are you doing all this for us? For my family? You've barely known us for a month." He rested his sweaty forehead against hers with infinite delicacy, creating a bubble of intimacy in the cold elevator. "Because I fell completely and irrevocably in love with you, Peyton," he admitted with total vulnerability. "And when you truly love someone genuinely, you instinctively protect the people that person loves. It's automatic, not calculated or strategic." The elevator stopped at the ground floor with a gentle jolt, but neither moved an inch, trapped in that moment of emotional revelation. "Declan, I honestly don't know if I can— Trust me?" "Trust myself," she admitted with brutal honesty, "to clearly distinguish what is deep and legitimate gratitude from what is true and spontaneous love. To know if my feelings are genuine or if they're a natural emotional response to your extreme generosity and protection." He smiled, but it was a melancholic and understanding smile, loaded with patience. "Then we have all the time in the world to discover together, without pressure, without rush. Let's take it slow." But when the elevator's metal doors opened with a mechanical sound that echoed through the lobby, Victoria Ashford was there waiting strategically, accompanied by a professional photographer with state-of-the-art equipment and a young, ambitious reporter with a directional microphone and high-definition camera. "What an absolutely fascinating coincidence to find you two here at the hospital," she said with pure venom distilled in her melodious voice, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "Taking care of the most urgent family interests, Peyton. What admirable dedication to family. It's impressive how love can be financially motivating." The professional camera flash exploded in their faces like a blinding lightning bolt, and Peyton instantly knew that her reputation had just been buried definitively and without any possibility of resurrection or recovery. "No comment," Declan said firmly, putting his protective arm around Peyton and trying to guide her away from the cameras. "Mr. Parsons?" the reporter shouted behind them. "Is it true that you're funding your girlfriend's family's medical treatment? How much did it cost to buy her love?" The words echoed through the hospital lobby like gunshots, and Peyton felt every curious and judgmental look from those present like physical stabbings. Her private life had become public entertainment, and there was no going back. When everything seems lost. The devastating headline of the Louisville Courier-Journal the next morning was spread across all newsstands in Louisville like an uncontrollable digital plague. Millionaire funds, millionaire medical treatment for contracted girlfriend's family, true love or calculated business. The front-page photo had captured with surgical precision the exact moment when Declan protectively held Peyton's hand in the illuminated hospital lobby, with a malicious caption that explicitly suggested everything a perverse and prejudiced mind could imagine worst about the nature of their relationship. Social media was completely insane. The hashtag #LouisvilleCinderella was among national trending topics, accompanied by cruel memes, conspiracy theories, and comments ranging from sexist to simply cruel. Some internet users defended Peyton, arguing that judging a woman for her financial choices was social hypocrisy, but they were a minority amid the virtual lynching that was happening. Peyton sat rigidly in the penthouse's gourmet kitchen, staring fixedly at the gourmet coffee, slowly cooling in the French porcelain cup, when Declan entered already impeccably dressed for another day of important meetings, adjusting the cuffs of his Italian shirt with automatic movements that betrayed years of practice in executive morning routines. "You don't need to go to work today," he said lovingly, adjusting his silk tie with precise movements. "Marcus got an emergency judicial injunction. The newspaper will be forced to remove the story from the air and all digital platforms within the next 2 hours. We also got a restraining order against Victoria to stop publicly persecuting us." "And will that really change anything substantive and practical?" she asked, without being able to lift her eyes from the table, her voice sounding tired and completely defeated. "People have already seen the story, already shared it thousands of times on social media, already judged and condemned without right to defense. My professional reputation is completely ruined, destroyed beyond any possibility of repair or recovery." "Peyton." "No, Declan." She stood up abruptly, finally facing him with red and swollen eyes from a completely sleepless night. "You simply don't understand the real and practical dimension of the problem we've created. You're rich, powerful, influential, and above all, a man. For you, this is just a temporary inconvenience, another image crisis that your expensive lawyers and specialized advisors will resolve with money and political connections. For me, this is literally the definitive and irreversible end of my professional career. What client in their right mind would want to hire an architect who supposedly sells herself to millionaires in exchange for financial favors and expensive medical treatments?" He approached carefully, but she instinctively stepped back, creating a physical distance that hurt more than any physical wound she had ever experienced. "Are you personally blaming me for this terrible situation?" "I'm blaming myself." Tears of frustration and anger finally came with full force. "I'm bitterly blaming myself for accepting this crazy and completely irresponsible agreement, for naively believing I could separate business from feelings as if it were humanly possible to compartmentalize complex emotions, for falling madly in love with you when I should have kept things strictly professional, rational, and emotionally safe." The silence that followed was absolutely deafening, filled only by the distant sound of Louisville's morning traffic below and the almost imperceptible hum of the central air conditioning. "You really fell in love with me?" he asked, with his voice choked and hoarse with genuine emotion, as if this revelation was simultaneously the best and worst news he could receive. "Does that still matter at this moment?" She laughed bitterly, a humorless sound that echoed through the luxurious kitchen. "Our fake and performative agreement goes public in exactly 1 week when you officially announce the breakup to the press, as provided in the contract. You'll come out of this whole story as the manipulative and opportunistic woman who deceived and exploited the poor, innocent, and lovesick millionaire. That's how the narrative will be constructed by the media. What if we don't announce any breakup?" "What do you mean?" She frowned, genuinely confused by the question. Declan took a deep breath, as if he were about to jump off a cliff without knowing if there was a working parachute. "Marry me. For real this time. Forever, not as social performance. Peyton stared at him as if he had completely lost his mind and lost all contact with objective reality. "Are you serious, or are you having a temporary psychotic episode?" "I've never been more serious in my entire life." "Declan, you can't solve all the complex problems of real life with money or desperate and impulsive marriage proposals," she said with exasperation. "Especially when the proposal clearly comes from pity for me and the impossible situation I've put myself in." "Pity!" He practically exploded, his controlled voice finally giving way to raw emotion, echoing through the kitchen like thunder. "Peyton, I'm asking you to marry me because I can no longer imagine even one day of my life without you by my side, because you transformed this cold and soulless penthouse into a true and welcoming home. Because you made me remember that genuine humanity and real goodness still exist in the world, that not everything is commercial transaction." "And I should simply believe that?" she questioned with skepticism. "After everything that happened in recent days, after having my life turned upside down and my reputation publicly destroyed." The electronic doorbell rang melodiously, brutally interrupting the discussion charged with emotion and tension. It was Sarah, Peyton's best friend since adolescence, carrying a vintage leather suitcase and a determined and worried expression on her delicate face. "I came to get you immediately," she said, entering the penthouse without ceremony, like a hurricane of protective energy. "I've already arranged a safe and discreet place for you to stay until things calm down and the media dust settles completely. My cousin has a farm in Bardstown where you can stay as long as you need, away from paparazzi and gossip mongers." "Sarah, all this drama really isn't necessary." "Yes, it is, and very necessary." Sarah looked at Declan with poorly disguised contempt and evident anger. "Some privileged men think they can play with people's lives and reputations with impunity without facing real consequences for the damage they cause. You know absolutely nothing about what you're talking about," Declan retorted, clearly irritated by the unfair accusation. "Yes, I do. I know perfectly what's happening here," Sarah continued implacably, her voice loaded with indignation. "I know my best friend is being publicly destroyed and humiliated because of a perverse game by bored rich people who have enough money to buy people but not enough wisdom to understand the consequences of their actions. And I know you two are too much in love to see that you're mutually hurting each other in destructive and unnecessary ways." Peyton and Declan looked at each other surprised, as if they had been caught red-handed doing something obvious that they themselves couldn't see. "It's obvious to anyone with two functioning neurons," Sarah continued with brutal and direct pragmatism. "Anyone can see you're completely crazy about each other. The real question is, are you going to continue martyring yourselves like dramatic teenagers in a Mexican soap opera, or are you finally going to have the courage to fight for what you feel?" Before either could formulate an adequate or at least articulated response, Marcus entered the apartment breathless and visibly agitated, carrying a folder of documents and with an expression of extreme urgency. "Declan, we have a much bigger problem than we initially imagined," he said, trying to catch his breath after clearly having run up to the penthouse. "Victoria didn't stop at the televised interview. She's officially suing Peyton for defamation and slander, claiming your relationship was constructed to socially harm her image. And she's threatening to reveal intimate and compromising details of your contract to all the city's tabloids, including some websites specialized in celebrity scandals." "What intimate details?" Peyton asked, genuinely confused and alarmed. "There are no intimate details. The contract is purely commercial and protocol. She's going to invent them," Marcus explained somberly, his legal experience clear in his worried voice. "She'll fabricate false evidence, buy witnesses, hire hackers to create fake conversations, anything necessary to completely destroy you. Unless what, Marcus? Speak up. Unless you publicly anticipate the announcement and officially declare that you married for true and spontaneous love, not for financial interest or commercial agreement," he explained quickly. If we can legally prove the relationship is genuine and based on real feelings, she automatically loses all legal credibility and the case becomes baseless. Peyton looked at Declan, then at Sarah, then back at Marcus, feeling like a piece in a chess game whose rules she didn't understand and whose consequences could definitely ruin her life. "Are you seriously suggesting I marry to win a lawsuit?" "We're suggesting," Sarah said, surprising absolutely everyone in the room with her response, "that you marry because you love this irritating and stubborn man, and he obviously loves you genuinely. The rest is just legal and social bureaucracy that can be resolved with time and patience." And for the first time in absolutely terrible days, Peyton smiled genuinely, feeling a small spark of hope ignite in her tired heart. The true wedding. The civil wedding took place on a rainy Tuesday in June, one of those typical Kentucky winter days when the sky is loaded with heavy clouds and the entire city seems wrapped in a melancholic but cozy mist. It was held at the most discreet and reserved courthouse that Marcus could find through his legal connections, on a quiet side street in downtown Louisville, far from the destructive media spotlights and curious looks of professional gossips. Only the legally necessary witnesses were present. Sarah in a delicate floral dress in blue tones she had chosen especially for the occasion, Marcus, impeccable as always in his classic grey suit, and Emma, who had received temporary medical discharge the day before, thanks to the revolutionary new treatment that was already showing extremely promising signs of substantial improvement. Peyton wore a simple white cotton dress that had belonged to her mother in the 1980s, with delicate embroidery handmade by Margaret Lawson herself when she was young, and Declan wore a dark Brazilian linen suit without a tie, deliberately casual to not attract unnecessary attention or create more material for the paparazzi who still occasionally pursued them. No invasive photographers, no curious crowd, none of the destructive media circus that their lives had tragically become in recent weeks. It was exactly the opposite of everything Declan had imagined for his wedding when he was younger, but it was also perfect in a way he had never expected. "Are you absolutely certain?" he asked quietly, holding her slightly trembling hands before the ceremony officially began, looking in her eyes for any sign of doubt or hesitation. "I'm certain that I love you more than I imagined it was humanly possible to love someone," she responded, looking deeply into his eyes with honesty that completely disarmed him. "We'll figure out the rest along the way, day by day, discovery by discovery." The ceremony was surprisingly quick and almost protocol, far from the pomp that generally characterized weddings of people from Declan's social circle. The justice of the peace, a gentle middle-aged man, conducted the proceedings with respectful efficiency, asking if both accepted each other as legitimate spouses. But when the justice of the peace solemnly said, "You may kiss the bride," Declan kissed her as if it were simultaneously the first and last time, as if he wanted to engrave that specific moment in his soul for all eternity, as if all the love he had discovered feeling for her needed to be communicated through that single gesture. "Now we're officially a real family," Emma whispered emotionally to Sarah, who was cleaning tears discreetly with a tissue, trying to maintain composure, but clearly moved. "And what a beautiful family," Sarah murmured back, watching how Declan looked at Peyton, as if she were a miracle he couldn't believe was real. After the courthouse, they went to a small and cozy restaurant in the heart of old Louisville, far from cruel spotlights and venomous gossip that had persecuted their lives. It was exactly the type of place Declan had never frequented before meeting Peyton. Simple, authentic, welcoming, full of real life and genuine people who worked hard to survive and find moments of joy. The restaurant was called Kentucky Comfort and was run by a family from Elizabethtown who had moved to Louisville 20 years ago. The walls were decorated with traditional American quilts and vintage photographs of the city. The food was homemade, prepared with recipes passed down through generations, and the atmosphere was warm in a way money can't buy. "You know what's most ironically funny about this whole story?" Peyton said, playing distractedly with the white gold wedding ring still new on her finger, admiring how the restaurant light made the metal shine. We spent months meticulously pretending to be in love, to discover we were genuinely in love the whole time, without realizing it. And now? Declan asked, intertwining his fingers with hers over the rustic wooden table that told stories through its marks and scratches. How do you live a real and authentic marriage after starting with a fake commercial contract? Is there a manual for that? We invent the rules as we go, she smiled tenderly, her eyes shining with cautious but real happiness. Day by day, discovery by discovery, trial and error, like everyone who marries for love does. We're not the first, nor will we be the last to find love in an unconventional way. Emma raised her glass of sweet tea with solemn drama. A toast to marriages that start strange and become true, she said, provoking laughter from everyone. And to step-brothers-in-law who come with expensive medical treatments included. Emma! Peyton scolded her, but was laughing. What? It's true, Emma defended herself. I got a brother-in-law and premium health insurance in the same package. Best deal of my life. But real life, complicated and unpredictable as always, was willing to give them a honeymoon as easily as they hoped. 3 days after the civil wedding, on a Saturday morning that promised to be peaceful and finally tranquil, Blake Passons, Declan's half-brother and minority partner in some hospitality sector ventures, appeared at the penthouse without prior notice, carrying strange and disturbing energy that immediately changed the apartment's atmosphere. Blake was physically similar to Declan, but there was something fundamentally different about him, a predatory quality that showed through his superficial charm. He was a few years younger, equally well-dressed, but his eyes carried a coldness that made people feel uncomfortable without understanding exactly why. "So, it's really true," he said, observing with critical and calculating eyes the subtle changes in the minimalist decoration. The great and relentless Declan Passons finally surrendered to romantic love. Who would have thought you had a heart functioning under all that business armor built over the years? Blake, Declan stood up from the armchair, visibly tense and defensive. What exactly do you want here? We haven't spoken in months. I want to personally meet my new sister-in-law, of course. He smiled, but there was something predatory in that smile, something that made Peyton instinctively feel uncomfortable. Blake Passons, the half-brother your husband prefers to forget, exists in the same complicated genealogical tree of the Passons family. Peyton immediately felt the electric tension in the air, as if a storm were forming inside the apartment, but she shook his hand politely, exactly as her mother had taught her since childhood, about social courtesy. Peyton Passons, she said, consciously testing the new name on her tongue, still strange but beginning to sound more natural. Very pleased to meet you, Blake. Passons, Blake repeated slowly, savoring each syllable as if it were expensive wine. Has an interesting and powerful sound, doesn't it? Especially considering you started as Lawson just a few months ago. A truly impressive and meteoric social transformation. The comment was like a cold slap in the face, calculated to hurt and humiliate. Peyton visibly paled, feeling as if all her insecurities had been cruelly exposed. Blake! Declan's voice came out dangerously low and controlled, with a clear underlying threat. You have exactly 5 seconds to explain what you're doing here, or to definitely leave my house and my life. I'm here because our father returned from limbo, Blake said casually, as if commenting about the weather. The silence that followed was absolutely sepulchral, as if all oxygen had been sucked from the environment. Peyton watched Declan's face transform, going through shock, disbelief, and finally a cold rage she had never seen before. Impossible, Declan whispered, as if the words had been forcibly torn from his throat. He died 15 years ago. We went to the funeral. We saw the coffin being buried. I threw dirt on the grave. Apparently, death was greatly exaggerated. Blake threw an elegant cream envelope on the coffee table with theatrical gesture. He wants to meet the daughters-in-law. It seems our family fame reached him, wherever he's been hiding all these years, pretending to be dead. Peyton picked up the letter with instinctively trembling hands. It was addressed in elegant and antiquated handwriting to the sons of Edward Passons, and had a golden stamp from Monaco, with paper that was clearly expensive and high quality. "This can't be real," she murmured, examining the paper as if it were a bomb that could explode in her hands. "It can and is absolutely real." Blake headed toward the door with calculated and dramatic steps. "He wants to have dinner with us next week. All of us, including the wives. A family reunion after so much time apart. It'll be touching, don't you think?" After he left, leaving a trail of tension and mystery that seemed to contaminate the apartment's air, Peyton and Declan remained silent for long minutes, processing the emotional bomb that had just exploded in their newly married lives. "Do you really think it's true?" she finally asked, still holding the letter as if it were a venomous snake. "With my father, Edward Passons, anything is possible." He sighed deeply, running his hands through his hair. "He disappeared when I was 20, leaving a mountain of unpayable debts, international financial scandals, and broken hearts scattered across the continent. If he's really alive, he must have a very powerful and probably selfish reason to return right now, right when I finally managed to build a stable life. What if it's an elaborate trap or an extortion attempt? Then we face it together." He pulled her close, wrapping her in his protective arms. "That's exactly what couples do, remember? They face storms hand in hand, whatever happens." Peyton smiled, but inside she felt that the true test of their marriage's resistance was just beginning, and it would be much more complicated and dangerous than any contract they had ever signed. The following week, their lives took a completely unexpected direction. Emma was responding magnificently to treatment in Baltimore. Doctors were optimistic about her complete recovery, and media pressure had considerably diminished after Marcus' legal actions. But the letter from Declan's supposed father had opened an emotional Pandora's box that neither was prepared to handle. Peyton watched her husband become more distant and thoughtful each day, clearly tormented by memories he had buried deeply. "Tell me about him," she said one night, finding Declan on the balcony looking at the river, lost in thoughts. "Edward Passons is a man who transforms everything he touches into tragedy," he said slowly. "Charismatic, intelligent, charming when he wanted to be, but also manipulative, selfish, and completely incapable of genuine love. He abandoned us when we needed him most, faked his own death to escape the consequences of his actions. And now he wants to come back? He wants something. Edward never does anything without a hidden agenda. The question is, what does he want this time? And how much will it cost us to find out?" Peyton held his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Then we won't find out. We don't respond to the letter. We don't attend his games. We build our own family, our own life, without ghosts from the past." Declan looked at her with renewed admiration. "How do you manage to be so wise?" "I grew up in a family that faced many storms together," she smiled. "I learned that sometimes the best answer is simply not to play the game others want you to play." And at that moment, Declan knew he had made the right choice. Not just in marrying her, but in choosing to build a future based on love and trust, instead of being haunted by past mistakes and manipulations. Epilogue: 6 months of true happiness. 6 months later, on a golden December afternoon, with Kentucky's autumn beginning to give its first demonstrations of intense warmth and renewed energy, Peyton was on the penthouse's panoramic balcony, watching the sunset paint the Ohio River with tones of liquid gold, flaming orange, and soft pink. When Declan arrived from work, carrying an official envelope and a curious but satisfied expression on his face. The balcony had completely transformed since she had moved in permanently. What was once a minimalist and cold space was now a lush, suspended garden, with tropical plants, colorful orchids, hanging ferns, and even a small herb garden she used for cooking. It was as if nature itself had taken over the space, bringing life and color to the previously sterile environment. "This arrived today by special delivery," he said, carefully handing her the envelope. "It's from Nashville." Victoria's divorce process was finally finalized from her old marriage to that textile businessman. She's officially free to pursue another unsuspecting millionaire and, more importantly, to leave our lives definitively in peace. "And our mysterious lost father?" Peyton asked, settling better in the new wicker chair they had bought together at an artisan furniture store in the Highlands. "Still lost in the world, apparently." Declan smiled ironically, sitting beside her. "Marcus hired a private investigator and discovered it was all an elaborate staging by Blake to test us and see if our marriage was solid enough to resist external pressures and family manipulations. Apparently, he was impressed with our unity and decided to leave us in peace." "What an unorthodox method of evaluating a relationship's stability," she laughed softly, the melodious sound echoing through the balcony. "But at least we discovered we're stronger together than we imagined. And you, what do you think of all this craziness that our life has been?" "I think," he approached her in the double chair they had installed specifically for moments like this, "that it doesn't matter anymore. We have our own family now, our own story, our own challenges to face and victories to celebrate. And we have something many couples take years to build, absolute trust in each other." Peyton smiled mysteriously, placing her protective hand on her still completely flat belly, but which already held the greatest and most precious secret a woman can carry. "Speaking of family," Declan's eyes widened as if he had seen a good ghost, as if the universe had just given him the most impossible and desired gift. "Are you 2.5 months?" She laughed at the expression of absolute shock and pure joy that formed on his face. "Dr. Harrison confirmed yesterday morning at the office. According to his calculations, our baby should be born at the end of July, right in the height of Kentucky summer, when the heat makes the city even more vibrant and alive." He delicately picked her up and spun her in the air with infinite care, laughing like a child who had just received the best Christmas present of his entire life, his joy so intense and genuine that tears of happiness began to flow down his face. "Well, tell the pure and simple truth," Peyton said, lovingly adjusting his tie that had become misaligned during the embrace, "that sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected and improbable way possible, but when it comes for real and with full force, it's worth any craziness, any risk, any necessary sacrifice. And if our son or daughter asks if it was love at first sight like in classic fairy tales, well, say it was love at first true touch." She held his face between her hands with infinite affection. "How are we going to explain to him or her that the parents met through a crazy commercial contract?" he asked, gently putting her back on the ground and immediately placing his protective hands over her belly. "Because it was exactly when you touched me for the first time, with that delicacy I never imagined existed, that I knew I would never be the same person again, that my life had changed forever. And I'll tell," he murmured, kissing her softly as if she were made of the most precious and fragile material in the universe, "that I found my purity and my redemption in the midst of the most violent storm of my life, and that you saved me from myself, when I didn't even know I needed to be saved from an empty life without real meaning." Across the city, in her new cozy apartment in the Highlands neighborhood, Sarah was finishing packing her clothes in a vintage leather suitcase that had belonged to her grandmother. She had finally decided to accept Blake's persistent and increasingly romantic invitation for a dinner for two, even knowing perfectly well that he was complicated, emotionally dangerous, unavailable in many aspects, and completely wrong for her in all possible rational aspects. But sometimes the best and most transformative love stories begin exactly like this, with someone completely wrong who becomes surprisingly right, with perfect timing and inexplicable chemistry that defies all logic. Emma, already completely recovered and back to fine art studies with renewed energy and a completely new perspective on life, was painting an impressionist picture of the panoramic view from the penthouse where her sister had found not just love, but a complete family and the kind of happiness she had only dreamed was possible. She was absolutely certain that one day she would tell this incredible story to the nephews and nieces who were coming, about how the rich and somewhat arrogant uncle and the idealistic architect aunt fell in love while meticulously pretending not to be in love. And Margaret Lawson, in her new and cozy little house that Declan had discreetly bought in a quiet and tree-lined neighborhood, smiled proudly, reading the society news that finally treated her daughter as the respectable and admired Mrs. Peyton Parsons, renowned architect specialized in sustainable projects and devoted wife of one of Kentucky's most influential and respected businessmen. The penthouse balcony plants had multiplied exponentially since Peyton had moved in permanently, transforming the modern and cold environment into a true tropical greenhouse full of life, color, natural fragrance, and positive energy. It was as if all that exuberant nature were a physical reflection of the emotional transformation that had happened in that previously impersonal space. "You know what impresses me most about this whole story?" Peyton said, watching a yellow and black butterfly delicately land on one of her favorite orchids, a rare species she had managed to cultivate with much care and patience. "What, my love? How two people can meet at the most improbable moment, in the most unusual and even controversial way, and still discover they were exactly what one needed to complete themselves, to become the best version of themselves." Declan smiled, pulling her closer while they watched the constant and hypnotic movement of boats in the marina below, the city preparing for another mild evening. "Maybe that's exactly what destiny does with us," he reflected philosophically. "It puts us in the most impossible and challenging situations so we can discover what we're really capable of when we truly love, when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and authentic." Some love stories begin with "once upon a time" in enchanted castles and perfect circumstances. Others begin with malicious contracts, broken hearts, destroyed reputations, and media storms in luxurious but soulless penthouses. But the best and most authentic stories begin with two courageous people who discover that true love cannot be bought, sold, negotiated, falsified, or forced. It can only be lived intensely, one day at a time, one discovery at a time, one true touch at a time, one conscious choice at a time. And when it's real, when it's strong, when it's built on solid foundations of mutual respect, genuine admiration and complete acceptance, that love becomes indestructible and eternal, capable of surviving any storm life may send, capable of growing and strengthening with each challenge overcome together. In the end, Peyton and Declan discovered that true love isn't about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who makes you perfect for them. And sometimes, just sometimes, the best loves are those that begin in the most improbable way possible. A story about how true love can be born from the most unexpected places, about how vulnerability can be strength, and about how two people can save each other when they least expect it.